Hey everyone, welcome. We're going to be tackling something that I think hits close to home for a lot of you out there. It's that fear of speaking English, especially when, it's not your first language.
Yeah.
And for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at a YouTube video. It's from the Learn English podcast channel,
Okay.
and it's titled, I Can Understand English, but I Can't Speak.
I can see why you picked that one.
Yeah, have you ever felt that way?
Oh, yeah, definitely. For sure. It's like you think you got it and then you just freeze up.
Right. You can read, you can listen,
Yeah,
but then when it comes to actually speaking.
totally. I think this video is going to be really interesting because it seems like it really digs into that difference, like between passively understanding a language and then actually being able to, produce it, to
Yeah.
speak it yourself.
Exactly. And they start off with some really interesting examples. Words that, sound similar but are spelled totally differently.
Oh, like what?
Like though and through.
Oh, yeah.
Or comb and balm. Those silent letters, right?
Ugh, silent letters are the worst.
I know. It's no wonder people get tripped up. And then, on top of that, it's not just the individual words. It's like the whole pronunciation system in English can be a nightmare.
It really can. And it's funny because when you're learning English, they tell you, oh, English pronunciation is so easy. But then you get into it,
Right,
and
yeah.
it's like, wait a minute, there are so many rules, and then there are all these exceptions to the rules.
And don't even get me started on grammar.
Oh, grammar.
Everyone's favorite.
The video mentions verb tenses, mixing those up,
Mm-hmm.
or forgetting that says at the end of words, which I still do sometimes.
Oh, yeah, all the time. But you know what? I think the important thing is to not get too discouraged by those mistakes.
Yeah.
We all make them. I mean, I make them, you make them. Even native English speakers make grammar mistakes.
That's true.
It's really about reframing our thinking. Instead of seeing mistakes as failures,
Yeah.
We need to start seeing them as opportunities to learn.
Oh, I like that. And actually, the video mentions some research from Science Daily about how making mistakes actually helps us learn better.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it has to do with something called cognitive dissonance, which is basically, well, when we make a mistake, it creates a conflict in our brains because we thought we understood something, but then boom, we get it wrong.
Right.
And that conflict forces our brains to really pay attention and analyze why we made the mistake. It's like our brain is going, hold on, something's not right here. We got to figure this out.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, and it's that process of, figuring things out that leads to deeper learning. So mistakes are kind of like little brain workouts.
I love that. Mistakes as brain workout.
Exactly. And speaking of brains, let's talk about the emotional side of all of this.
Okay.
Because the video also gets into that fear, the fear of making mistakes and the fear of being judged when you speak English. There's this really powerful quote in the video where someone says, I was terrified to speak at first because I thought everyone would judge me.
Wow, I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, me too. I think that fear can be so paralyzing.
But the video emphasizes that everyone makes mistakes. Even, like we were saying, native speakers.
Yeah.
Nobody's perfect.
Right. And I think the video does a really great job of encouraging us to look at mistakes differently, right?
Uh-huh.
Instead of seeing them as setbacks, we need to view them as, as signs that we're challenging ourselves, that we're pushing beyond our comfort zone.
Yeah, I love that. It's about growth.
Exactly.
So how do we actually, overcome that fear?
Well, the video talks a lot about practice.
Okay, practice.
Right. The more you practice speaking, even if it's just for a few minutes every day,
Yeah.
the more comfortable and confident you'll become. But I think it's also important to think about how we approach practice,
Okay.
Sometimes we have this idea that practice has to be like this big formal thing, like we have to sign up for a class or get a language partner. But honestly, practice can be anything.
Right. You can just incorporate it into your everyday life.
Exactly. In small ways, even.
So, what kind of things? The video gives some examples, right?
Yes. And I think those are really helpful because they're so simple, like using language learning apps.
Oh, yeah, those can be great.
Or talking to friends who speak English.
Mm-hmm.
Or even just thinking to yourself in English throughout the day.
Wow, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Just changing your internal monologue.
Totally. It's all about immersing yourself in the language bit by bit.
And you know what else I found helpful? Watching movies or TV shows in English.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
It's fun, and you get exposed to different accents and all those cool expressions.
I love that. It's about making the learning process enjoyable, because if you enjoy it, you're more likely to, stick with it.
Totally. So we've talked about pronunciation, grammar, the fear of making mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
and practice, practice, practice. But there's another challenge that the video brings up. It's something I struggle with too, even outside of language learning. It's that.
The comparison trap.
Yes. Comparing ourselves to others, especially you when you see those people online who seem like they speak English perfectly.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It can make you feel so discouraged.
It's like, why even bother?
Right. But the video does a really good job of addressing this. It emphasizes that everyone learns at their own pace, you know?
Hmm.
And there's no such thing as a perfect English speaker. It's not about erasing your own voice and trying to sound like someone else.
Right.
It's about communicating clearly and being authentically yourself.
And that's such a powerful message.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses, and we should celebrate our own progress.
Absolutely.
It's like the journey is personal. It's unique to you.
Exactly. And it's important to find joy in that journey.
I like that. And speaking of journeys, I think it's time for us to take a little detour.
Okay, a detour. Where are we going?
We're going to take a quick break, but don't worry, we'll be back soon to continue this deep dive into conquering the fear of speaking English. So before the break, we were talking about like shifting our perspective when it comes to learning English.
Right, moving away from this idea that we have to be perfect.
Yeah, because I feel like when we're so focused on being perfect,
Yeah,
we kind of miss out on the fun part of learning.
totally. It's like,
Yeah.
we get so caught up in not making mistakes that we forget to enjoy the process of discovery and just like the satisfaction of actually making progress, even if it's messy progress.
Right, and I think that ties in perfectly with what we were talking about earlier with like finding fun and interesting ways to practice.
Yeah, for sure.
The video gave us some great examples, movies, podcasts, writing. It seems like there are endless possibilities.
There really are. And the cool thing is you can totally tailor your practice to things you're actually interested in.
Yeah.
So if you love movies, watch movies in English. If you're into podcasts, listen to podcasts in English.
I've always loved reading. So when I was learning Spanish, I read tons of books in Spanish.
That's awesome. And it's a perfect example of what we're talking about, right? Like,
Mhm.
practice doesn't have to feel like a chore. It can be something you genuinely enjoy doing.
Totally. So let's get into some like more specific tips.
Okay, yeah.
Because I know our listeners out there are probably thinking like, okay, this is great, but how do I actually do this?
Right?
So we talked about language apps. We talked about talking to friends who speak English. But what about when you don't have access to those things?
That's a great question. Like, what if you're not surrounded by English speakers? What do you do then?
Exactly.
Well, I think this is where you got to get a little creative. You have to create those opportunities for yourself.
So like how?
Well, first of all, think about your phone. I know we talked about apps, but you can also use your phone's voice recorder.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Record yourself speaking about different topics, maybe even read an article or a story aloud,
Oh, that's a great idea.
and then listen back to it. You can hear how you sound. You can pick up on any pronunciation errors or areas where you're not as fluent.
It's like having your own personal speech coach.
Right. And another thing you can try, this might sound a little weird, but create like an English-only zone in your home.
An English-only zone.
Yeah, like maybe it's your bedroom or your study or wherever.
Yeah.
Just a space where you commit to only speaking, reading, and writing in English.
Oh, I love that.
It's like a little mini immersion environment. And you can make it fun. Put up some English posters or quotes, anything to surround yourself with the language.
That's so cool. And it reminds me, we talked about movies and TV shows before.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of people find those really helpful, but sometimes I hear people say they're worried about like picking up bad grammar or slang from watching TV.
Right, yeah. That's a valid concern. I think it's about being mindful of what you're watching. If you're worried about slang, maybe stick to things that are known for having like clear, proper English.
Oh, that makes sense.
Mm.
Any recommendations?
Oh, totally. Period dramas are great for that. Downton Abbey, The Crown, things like that.
I love those.
You'll get beautiful, articulate English, and you'll learn about British culture too.
That's awesome. What about podcasts? Any favorites for English learners?
Ooh, so many good ones. Okay, 6 Minute English by the BBC is really great for short, bite-sized lessons. And All Ears English is awesome if you want to focus on American English and like conversation skills. Oh, and The English We Speak is another BBC one that's all about idioms and expressions.
Those are great suggestions. Okay, so we've talked a lot about speaking, but the video also mentions writing as a really important way to improve your English.
Yeah, definitely.
So what are some ways that we can like incorporate writing into our practice?
One thing I always recommend is keeping a journal in English. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just a place where you can jot down your thoughts and feelings, your daily experiences, whatever, all in English.
Oh, I love that. I'm a
Yeah.
big journaler myself.
It's a great way to process things. And, sometimes when you're writing in another language, it can help you express yourself in new ways.
I've definitely found that to be true.
Yeah, it forces you to really think about how you're using the language to get your ideas across.
So if journaling isn't your thing, are there other writing exercises people can try?
Sure. You could try writing short stories or poems, or even just emails or messages to friends who speak English. The main thing is to make it a habit, a regular part of your routine.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've also found that participating in online forums or communities where people are discussing things in English can be really helpful.
Oh, that's a great idea. You get to practice your writing and get feedback from others.
Exactly. And it kind of ties back to that whole idea of community, right? Like connecting with others who are on the same journey.
Yes, it's so important to remember that you're not alone in this.
Totally. And that support can make such a difference. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from finding fun ways to practice, to using technology, to the power of community.
Yeah, it's been a good conversation.
And I think the biggest takeaway is this. Learning English should be an enjoyable experience. It should be something that empowers you.
Absolutely. It's about finding joy in the journey and celebrating your progress along the way.
And remember, there's no one right way to do it. Experiment, find what works for you, and have fun.
Exactly. We'll be back in a moment to wrap everything up.
Okay, so we're back and ready to kind of like wrap up our deep dive into this whole fear of speaking English thing.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a lot more optimistic about the whole thing now.
Me too. It's amazing how just like changing how you think about it can make such a big difference.
Totally. And we've talked about so many practical things you can do, so many tips and strategies.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest takeaway for me is that it's really all about finding what works for you.
Yeah, and making it enjoyable. It's
It's
like
true.
there's no one right way to learn a language.
Right.
What works for one person might not work for another. So it's really about, experimenting, being patient with yourself, and just celebrating all those little wins along the way.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing we learned that I think is so important to remember is that making mistakes is totally okay. It's part of the process.
It is, and actually it's more than okay. Remember, we talked about how mistakes can actually help us learn better.
Yeah.
It's like those aha moments. Those are the moments where your brain is really growing.
So true. I think the thing that really stuck with me from all this is what we were talking about earlier with accents. Like for so long, I think a lot of us have felt like we need to sound like native speakers to, be considered fluent. But this video really challenges that idea.
It does, and that's such an important message because your accent is part of who you are.
Right.
It reflects your own unique journey and experiences, and it's definitely something to be proud of, not something you need to try to erase.
Exactly. It's about owning your voice, expressing yourself authentically. And, thinking about the title of that video, I can understand English, but I can't speak. I think a lot of it really comes down to confidence.
Oh, totally. I think that's a huge part of it. That fear of making mistakes or being judged holds so many people back from actually speaking up. But like we've been saying, everyone makes mistakes.
Hmm.
And the more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
It's like you have to shift your mindset from fear to curiosity, from self-criticism to self-compassion.
Yes. I love that. And remember, you don't have to go through this alone.
Oh, that's so true.
There's so many resources out there and communities to support you.
Yeah, like language exchange partners, online forums, heck, even just talking to friends or family who speak English.
Exactly. It's all about finding that support system. So to anyone listening who's feeling stuck or discouraged or just, unsure of themselves, I want to say, you can do this.
You are capable of more than you think.
Believe in yourself, embrace the journey, and most importantly, have fun.
I love that. Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, we're always here to cheer you on. So that wraps up our deep dive into conquering the fear of speaking English. Hopefully you've picked up some helpful tips and are feeling inspired.
Yeah. We'll see you next time.
Happy learning, everyone.